Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. I'm Nancy Ryans, and on this edition of Art Talk, we're going to begin to discuss some of the things that you need to keep in mind if you want to start participating in art festivals as an artist. Now, what we mean by art festivals are those shows that are usually done outside in park settings where every artist has a booth or a tent that they set up their art in. These can be indoors as well. And of course, they wouldn't have a tent then, but each artist would have a booth. And usually those booths are in multiples of 10 by 10. So 10 by 10, 10 by 20, etc. And these are usually juried shows, meaning your art has to be accepted in order to be able to have a booth in the show. That's what we're talking about here. Now we're talking about fine art fairs and festivals. We're not talking about craft festivals here. So a lot of the things that we're going to be talking about could apply to craft fairs and festivals, but I'm really going to focus on those that are really just fine art. So painting, drawing, and sculpture, that kind of art, not including pottery or, weaving or that kind of thing. Those are typically put into craft fairs and craft festivals. So today, since I'm a fine artist, I'm an oil painter, I'm going to focus in on what you need to do to prepare for a fine art show. Now, we're not going to talk about getting accepted into the show here. I'm going to handle that in a separate video because that's really its own thing. So this is meant for newbies, new people who are getting into those art fairs and festivals. Again, we're not going to cover craft fairs, but once accepted into that show, what is it that you need to keep in mind? What is it that you need to do? So the first thing, as always, is to make sure that the work that you have to display in that art fair or festival is the absolute best that you can produce. Now, you can definitely show some older pieces in that show or in your booth, but I really recommend having as many newer pieces as possible, and they need to be really good quality ones because you never know who's going to be walking through your booth. And you want to be able to sell these pieces. So always make sure that you have in your booth the best that you can do. In a separate video, we're going to talk about getting rid of your art, the art that no longer is representative of where you want to be in your art. But for now, just keep in mind that what you display in your booth really should be the best that you can do. All right, so that being said, the next thing you're going to keep in mind is that you're going to get in the mail typically or in email all of the information that you need in order to do the show. Now, it depends on the art festival. They'll usually send these out a couple of months ahead of time at least. Some of them send them out 6 months ahead of time. So you may get them at varying points before the show starts, but you're going to get a packet of information. In that packet, you're going to read everything because each show is very different from the other ones. So each show is going to have different booth requirements, different setup requirements. It's going to have its own schedule and all different things that you need to do. So what I'm talking about here in this video is just general stuff. But the next thing you're going to need to do is read all of the documents that you get from that show, read the requirements for the show and the venue both, and comply with them. You don't want to break the rules. This is not where a place for you to break the rules. Typically, if you try to break the rules in a show like this, you're booted out and they'll never ask you back again. So do your best to follow all of the rules. Keep to the schedule. If you cannot, for some reason, keep to the schedule or have question about the rules, call the contact person for that show and discuss it with them personally. Sometimes individual arrangements can be made if there's a good enough reason to do so, but please, please, please keep to the requirements of the show if at all possible, and communicate with that show if you can't do so. Okay, so about a month out, you want to make sure at least a month out. I would recommend more like 2 months before the show, but at the very least, a month out before the show, If this is an outdoor show, you're going to need to have a tent. I know some shows don't require a tent, but I guarantee you that if you don't have one, it will rain or fog and sleet or something like that. So if this is an outdoor show, buy or rent or borrow one of those rectangular canopy tents that have sidewalls on them. Typically, you're going to want white because white is the most accepted for these venues. Some shows will let you have different colors, but white is a good basic color to have that will be accepted in basically any show that you want to be in. So you're going to want to buy, rent, or borrow a tent. There are two popular brands of tents for types of shows like this. The first one is called EzUp, EZUP. I don't use that one in particular, but I've heard it's a really great one. The other one is EurMax, and I use the higher quality version of the EurMax tent. They're both very similar, but they're both pop-up type of tents that are usually pretty easy to set up. So again, you're going to want to buy, rent, or borrow a tent. If you're just starting out, see if you can borrow a tent from someone else and have them show you how to set that up. Now, to go along with that tent, you're going to have some kind of a display system. You can, for some shows, not all shows, but some shows will let you make your own or use those metal mesh grid wall things that really, honestly, they don't look very good. Some artists choose to make their own display panels. And as long as those look good and kind of go with your art, those are usually acceptable. But there are also two systems that you can purchase if you maybe don't have the ability to make your own panels or you just don't want to mess with it. The most popular ones are Pro panels and then the Flourish mesh panels. So see below for the description for both of those. I'll put links to those in the description. Pro panels is what I use now. They are very lightweight panel systems that are set up on I think it's a steel frame, and in between the steel frame, it's about the size of a regular door, but there's a really hard like polystyrene foam in the middle and a carpet on like a loop carpet on the outside. And they just look really professional when you set them up in your booth. They are very expensive. So if you are just getting started out in this business, I really recommend the Flourish mesh panels instead. They're a lot less expensive to get into, and you might be able to buy a used set of those on the internet. Okay, so that being said, once you have your display system either chosen or made or you've purchased that, the next thing you want to do is make sure that you have the hardware available for hanging the art. Now, if you use Pro panels or Flourish panels, each one will have their own system for hanging the art, and they're very different. So you're going to want to buy hanging hardware that matches with the display system that you're using. The other thing to keep in mind with this hanging hardware is buy more and carry more than you think you're going to need, because typically at a show you're going to be frantically putting stuff up on your panels at the last minute. Have more hanging hardware than you think you need, because the worst thing in the world is not to be able to hang all your art because you don't have enough hardware to hang it on the panels. Trust me, I've done it. I won't do it again. All right, now once you have that set up, so you've got your tent, you've got your panels or whatever display system you're going to use, before the show, make sure that somewhere you have practiced setting up the tent, the display panels, and your art. I cannot stress this enough, especially if this is your first time. You are definitely going to want to practice setting up that tent the first time at home where it's a controlled environment and you have somebody to help you. If this is an indoor show, meaning you're not going to have a tent, then just practice setting up the panels or the display system along with the art. Okay, this will give you the opportunity to make all of your mistakes ahead of time and not on the day of setup when things are already chaotic and crazy. I guarantee you it's going to be a lot easier on setup day if you've already done this a couple of times on your own at home. Okay, so when we're talking about the booth, some people like to have tables or some kind of a stand in their booth. If you're working in sculpture, you're definitely going to have stands. But if you're a two-dimensional artist like me, I have paintings that I hang on my panels. I like to have a small 2 foot by 4 foot folding table on which I set up my business cards, notebooks, or anything else that I need. And that's where I also handle all the sales transactions right there. I have it's a basic folding table, again, 2 foot by 4 foot, so it doesn't take up a lot of room. I put a black drape over that because the my mesh panels are a very dark gray, so it goes really well with the background. Always put some kind of a drape over your table if you use one. It's just ugly if you don't. So whether you have a table or not is up to you. Some artists don't like it. That's totally okay. A next thing to keep in mind is how much to decorate your booth, or whether you even decorate it outside of the art, is up to you. Participants at fine art fairs, meaning painting, drawing, and sculpture, tend to be rather understated in terms of booth decoration, and that's okay. And I'm like that too. We do this because we want the attention to be on the art, not on how pretty the tent is. So we want the focus to be on the art. Now, there are some art shows where it really is helpful to have a really beautiful tent. I don't do that because, first of all, I don't want all that extraneous decor. When I travel to an art show, I'm working out of a pickup truck with a camper shell on it. I don't necessarily want to be carrying also a trailer behind me. So I like to keep my load pretty light to just art, tent, display panels, and then a couple of other boxes of miscellaneous stuff. So that's why I try to keep all that set decoration to a minimum. Some people like to have all that extra fluff and decor. That's fine. That's totally up to you. That just means you're going to have to carry all that with you. The other thing to keep in mind is you're going to need to have some kind of a banner on the front of your tent with your name, at the very minimum, your name and website address or other contact information. You absolutely need a banner. I use a vinyl banner that I can then just roll up at the end of the show, tuck into a box, and off we go to the next show. And that I use zip ties to put that onto the front of the tent. It's pretty quick, pretty painless, pretty easy. It doesn't take up room inside the tent, but you definitely need to have a sign for people to see who you are and how they can get in touch with you. Now, once we kind of walk into the booth, once it's set up, for each piece of artwork, no matter whether it's a sculpture or a painting or a drawing, you're going to need some kind of a display tag for each piece with the price, the size, and the medium at the very least. People want to know, is it an oil painting? How much is it? And what size is it? Make these look as professional as possible. So what I do is I buy a set of business cards online. So on one side, it's just a regular business card. On the back is room for that price, the size, and the medium. And that becomes my art tag in the booth for each individual piece. And then when the piece sells, I just tuck that little business card with the information on the back, kind of in the back of the painting, so that the buyer has that information going forward. So make sure you have those tags. You can use different options as well, but that's just what I use. It's easy. So make sure that you have those business cards on hand that have the room on the back for that medium size and price. Okay, so the next thing to think about, and you might need to buy it or not, it's up to you, is lighting. Lighting can be a really really tricky subject. If you're doing an indoor show, lighting is probably going to be necessary. Even overhead lights in a conference center aren't enough to really adequately light up your artwork. I have also found that the cheapy lights, the cheapy LED lights really don't work very well. I've tried them and basically tossed them all out because they don't work very well. So if I choose to go in the future use lighting in my booth, it's going to be a better lighting system than what I've had before, something that's very bright and can adequately light the entire interior of my display area. Now, I don't normally do a lot of indoor shows, so I don't have a lighting setup right now. A good lighting system for a booth will typically run you $200 to $500 US. So it's not a casual investment. It's actually, you need to really think about what you want to use in there. What I would recommend is, if you're considering doing indoor shows, go to a few indoor shows and see what lighting systems people are using and see if it's adequate. Is it something that you would want to do? And then ask that artist about it. What lighting system is it? Get as much information as you can. So for outdoor shows, lighting might not actually be necessary. And out here in the Rocky Mountain West, I usually don't use lighting in an outdoor show. Typically, outdoor shows don't go past sundown anyway, so there's no reason to light up the inside of the tent. And there's usually enough light available in the atmosphere to light up the tent, because I use a very thin, lightweight white tent, so the light actually comes through pretty well. Okay, so kind of on that topic of weather, at least for outdoor shows, this is a requirement for me. Make sure that you have tent weights and or stakes to keep your tent from blowing away in the wind. Some shows do not require tent weights. They don't require them. So make sure that you use them anyway, even if they're not a requirement, because I guarantee you there's going to be a time, if you choose not to use the weights, a wind is going to come up and your tent is going to go flying. And that's the last thing that you want to do, because it could hurt somebody. And then you're responsible for that. So make sure that you weight the corners down or stake them down. I prefer weights over stakes because I don't like all those ropes kind of coming off my tent. I don't want those trip hazards around me. But again, there's many options. I use homemade like PVC weights that I make out of PVC pipe. You can just Google that on the internet and find out how to do that. But it's basically 2-foot PVC pipes with the end capped. They're filled with concrete with a hook, that a long hook put in it, and so you can hang them on the corners of the tent, or bungee cord them to the corners of the tent. I recommend 40 pounds per leg, so that's a total of 160 pounds of weight for the entire tent. It should pretty well take care of most situations. Some shows might require a little bit more, so again, read those show requirements and see what they want you to do. I don't rely on being able to stake the tent, because a lot of these shows take place on areas with super hard ground, or they're on concrete, or they're on a gravel surface. So it's almost impossible to drive a stake into the ground. So use those backups, use that as a backup to the weights. All right, so on to some more practical considerations here. So most of these art fairs that are the festivals that are really all about fine art, they're going to want to have the majority of the art in your booth to be original. So not prints, they want originals. Each show is going to be different on what they allow. There are some shows that will only allow you to bring 10% of your stock is prints and the rest need to be originals. Whether you bring prints or not is up to you. But again, make sure you check with the requirements for that show venue to see how many you're allowed. I only bring a couple. And if people want to buy those, then I ship them to them later. So I don't carry a lot of prints with me. Most of my sales are for originals anyway. I don't get a lot of sales of prints. Some other artists get more print sales than originals. It's different for each person. But whether you bring prints is up to you. But again, make sure that you know the requirements for that venue and heed them. Okay, so the next thing to keep in mind is to make sure that you have a few copies of your artist bio, your resume, and artist statement in the booth. There are potential collectors who will want to know a little bit more about you, so you can hand them your resume or your artist statement, or even a brochure would also work. But just keep in mind, brochures can be kind of expensive to have printed up. So that's why I recommend, a black and white one pager with your bio and then resume and artist statement on them. Now, other things that you're going to need to bring, business cards. Like I said before, if you get the right business card, those can double as both business cards and art tags. So do a 2-for-1 there, especially if space in your vehicle is limited. Carry a newsletter sign-up sheet. So if you do a newsletter and people want to get in on that, they can sign up for it right there in your booth. You're going to need some kind of a way to close off the front of your booth temporarily if you need to step away. I use a white tarp, and I just use those zip ties to zip tie it closed. And then during the day when I'm there, I actually just roll that tarp up and kind of tie it off on one leg of the front of the tent so that it's always there ready to close off. And that way, you can go to, if you can't get anybody to help you out, you can head to the restroom and go grab something to eat and not be too worried about somebody coming in. I've never really had issues with theft in the art fairs that I've done, but I do, whenever I need to step away, I've gotten away from trusting the people on either side of me to help out, especially if I don't know them, because they're busy selling their own art. They're not going to care about yours. So I just close the tent up and walk away as quickly as possible, come back and, come back to it. The other thing to bring with you, and I do this, I tuck large totes, large, really plastic totes underneath that 2-foot by 4-foot table that I can padlock those totes at night. I stick the smaller paintings in those totes overnight, tuck them under the table, and padlock the tops closed on 2 corners so that people can't break in and steal those smaller artworks. I can't do that with the bigger artwork. So overnight, I a lot of artists will tend to leave the bigger artwork in the tent. For me, I will typically either do that or I'll pull them off into my truck every night and just take them with me. Usually those venues will have night guards, night security. Some security is better than others, but again, I've rarely heard of instances at shows like that. But if you have particularly valuable art that you're taking with you, figure out a way to keep that safe overnight. Some people will just take everything down at night, put it up in the morning, and that's how they do it. The other things you're going to need are things like, pens and pencils and Sharpies, little Sharpie markers, a small toolkit for sure. You're probably going to need a hand truck or a dolly, some kind of a way to move your equipment around the venue, especially if you have to park your vehicle a long way away from where your tent is. So have some kind of a dolly, even if it's a collapsible dolly, to help you move your equipment. For sure, bring some extra bungee cords and zip ties. You're just going to need them. I guarantee you're going to need them at some point. Bring a chair so that you can sit down and take a break every once in a while, and plenty of water and food. The other thing to do is bring some wrapping material and shopping bags for when you make a sale. So you don't want to just hand the person the art. You want to wrap it up and keep it safe for them as they're going about the rest of the art festival. So bring some wrapping material and shopping bags for when you make a sale. The other thing you're going to need to bring too is some kind of a receipt booklet. or you can buy these on Amazon, just a receipt booklet of some kind, so you can write up a receipt for the buyer when they purchase a painting, and then you can calculate the tax and all that stuff on there. We'll worry about what to do on the day of the show in a little bit future video, but just make sure that you have at least one of those receipt booklets on hand. So things that I'm getting away from doing after a lot of years of experience, I've just decided that carrying a lot of prints doesn't really work for me. I carry a couple in the booth just to give people an idea of the quality of the printing company that I use. But instead I have a 3-ring binder with photos of all of the prints that I currently have available and the prices and sizes. And so people can then just order those from me directly there. But I only carry a couple of prints in the booth. I've gotten away from carrying note cards and postcards either for sale or giveaway. I've found that if I give away too much, then people won't actually be tempted to buy a print. So I've just gotten away from all those inexpensive giveaways like note cards and postcards. Some people don't agree with me on that, but I've just found that when you're doing these higher end art shows, if somebody's really interested in your art, a business card is enough. And if they know where to find you, they will find you. But giving away a postcard isn't going to be helpful, and that may actually prevent, for you anyway, the sale of a print or something else. So that's about it for today in this discussion. So this is just really getting prepared to do an art show. We're going to next discuss what to do on the day of the show and how to handle yourself while the show is going on. Take care, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.